Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling one of the most fundamental and honestly unsettling questions in all of human psychology. And it's one that really cuts to the core of how we see ourselves. Is it actually true that a normal, peaceful person, someone with no real malice, someone who you consider a good person, could do something truly awful?
Just because they were put in a certain situation.
Exactly. Could you or I cross some unthinkable moral line simply because the world around us changed?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And after looking at decades of research, from the classic studies to more modern analyses, the answer from psychology is, well, it's a deeply troubling yes.
An unequivocal yes.
Yes, we are incredibly adaptable, and things like the environment, unchecked authority, pressure from a group, even just raw fear, they can completely override our internal moral compass. They can lead us to do things we would have sworn were impossible for us.
And that's why we're doing this dive. We're not talking about psychopaths or, inherent evil. We're talking about situational behavior. The transformation of an ordinary person into someone violent, all driven by external pressure.
Right.
So our mission today is to really unpack the mechanics of that. What are the psychological levers that get pulled, the little switches inside our heads that flip and cause this massive change? We want to give you a real insight into just how fragile our morality can be.
We're looking at that moment of transition, the moment a person stops being an individual moral agent and becomes, well, just a component in a system. Understanding that is really the only way we can guard against it.
Okay, so let's start with the big one. The landmark study that, for all its controversy, is still the most powerful proof of this concept. We have to start with the Stanford Prison Experiment, the SPE.
Yes, it's the perfect, if terrifying, starting point. It just shows the sheer speed at which context can consume character.
And the most important thing to remember about the people in this study, they were ordinary.
Oh, absolutely. That's the key. They were meticulously screened. The researchers specifically chose them because they were stable, well-adjusted, non-aggressive university students. Then they were just split into two groups, arbitrarily.
Prisoners and guard.
Prisoners and guards, in a mock prison set to run for 2 weeks.
But the speed of the change is what's just so chilling when you read the source materials. The experiment didn't even make it a full week.
Not even close. Within just a couple of days, the students who were assigned the role of guards stopped acting like students. They started exercising this petty, unpredictable tyranny over the prisoners.
And it wasn't just them, yelling a bit. The details are specific.
That's the crucial point we can't ignore. This was real abuse, and it started early. We're talking guards demanding prisoners strip naked, forcing them into humiliating tasks, sleep deprivation. They were inventing rules on the spot just to maintain total dominance.
They weren't reacting to a threat. The prisoners weren't actually dangerous.
No, not at all. They were reacting to the role. They invented the aggression because, in their minds, the environment demanded an aggressor.
So what was it? What was the mechanism there? Was it as simple as putting on a uniform and sunglasses?
That was part of it, the anonymity. But it was really the structure itself. The guards were given power, the uniform, the keys, the nightstick, and critically, they were unsupervised.
So no one was checking in on them?
No one was. There was this built-in expectation of dominance in the role. They understood, without anyone needing to say it, that they'd entered a space where the normal rules of society just didn't apply anymore. The prison environment itself became the justification for their behavior.
The takeaway, then, from all the analysis isn't that these were secretly sadistic kids.
Not at all.
It's that the external structure, the role, the power, the lack of accountability, it created this incredibly rapid internal change. It pushed them over an ethical line faster than anyone could have imagined. The environment wasn't the background, it was the main character in the story.
Absolutely. The system dictated the behavior, not the person's disposition. And that's the fundamental difference between, say, dispositional violence, which comes from some internal pathology, and situational violence, which is born from circumstance.
That really makes you stop and think, about the pressures in our own lives and our institutions. So if the external environment is the catalyst, let's zoom in a little. What are the specific ingredients in that environment? What are the psychological triggers that allow someone to cross their own moral boundaries without that, blaring alarm bell of guilt going off?
The research identifies this really potent mix, a synergy of 4 distinct factors that work together to basically numb an individual's moral feedback loop.
Okay.
What was the first one?
The first, and maybe the most powerful, is unsupervised authority. This is power without any oversight, without accountability. When a person knows deep down that their actions won't be judged or punished, the whole incentive to behave morally can just collapse.
It's the license to misbehave. It's the ultimate license, yes. And that leads right into the second trigger, which is the subjective feeling of power. This isn't just about having authority on paper, it's that intoxicating internal feeling of dominance you get from the role. It can be like a psychological high, and it reinforces itself. You want more.
And suddenly, empathy or kindness starts to feel like a weakness in that context.
It feels like a threat to your power.
Well,
Exactly. Now, the third factor is the one that's, well, it's the hinge point for almost every large-scale atrocity in history.
the ability to separate people into groups.
Yes, the separation of us and them. It's the creation of an in-group and an out-group. And the sources are so clear on this. Once you establish that mental barrier, it makes the process of dehumanization incredibly easy.
Because if the them group isn't fully human in your mind,
Then your moral responsibility to them just evaporates. You aren't hurting a person anymore. You're just dealing with a problem, an object, an obstacle.
that mental trick, that reduction of their humanity, it seems like it's the absolute prerequisite for any kind of systemic violence.
It is. And then finally, the fourth trigger is group pressure. This is the powerful collective expectation to conform. If everyone around you, your fellow guards, your squad mates, is engaging in a certain behavior, the psychological pain of being the one to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, is often greater than the moral pain of just going along with it.
Yeah. So you've got this perfect storm. The structure gives you the license. That's the unsupervised authority.
Right.
The internal state gives you the motive, the feeling of power.
Mm-hmm.
The cognitive part gives you the justification, us versus them. And then the social environment enforces it all with group pressure.
And when you mix those four ingredients, you get what the source material describes so chillingly, individuals who go beyond their limits without feeling it. The pressure from the system is so complete that the little inner voice, the one that says, this is wrong, it just gets silenced. It's drowned out by the need to conform and that intoxicating sense of power.
But I have to ask, surely there's a baseline, a personality type that resists this. Are we really saying that this kind of situational pressure can transform almost anyone? That if you put the most moral person you can think of in the wrong place at the wrong time, they'd still break?
The findings are terrifyingly universal. I mean, yes, personal integrity might buy you some time. It might delay the moral collapse. But the research suggests it rarely prevents it entirely when those four triggers are being pulled hard enough for long enough.
So the focus shouldn't be on finding more heroic individuals.
No. The focus should be on fixing the systems, on removing the triggers, rather than hoping for the impossible persistence of individual heroism in a toxic environment.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. The sources suggest there are two very distinct paths that a quiet, nonviolent person might take toward committing an act of extreme violence. One is all about primal instinct, and the other is about social conformity.
Right. Let's start with path A. This is the survival instinct. Pure fight or flight. It's immediate, it's reactive, and it's driven almost entirely by fear.
So how does that translate into what we'd call situational violence? This isn't someone thinking through self-defense.
No, not at all. We're talking about a sudden primal shift where the body is essentially hijacked by stress. When a person finds themselves in a situation of chaos or extreme threat, like in a war zone or what they think is an ambush, their brain just switches modes. The rational thinking part, the prefrontal cortex, it basically goes offline to save energy.
The control center is down.
The control center is down, and the response is handed over to the deeper, faster parts of the brain, specifically the amygdala. It's often called an amygdala hijacking. The entire system is focused on one thing and one thing only: survival.
So in that moment, you're not thinking, you're just reacting.
We're just reacting. And the key detail here, which the research really emphasizes, is that the threat doesn't even have to be real. It just has to be perceived as real. If a person feels their life is on the line, they can bypass all rational thought and just attack preemptively. It's a reflex. They're not acting from malice. They're acting from pure terror.
So it's more of a physiological response than a moral failure. It's the stress hormones doing the talking, not the conscience.
Precisely. And it's often followed by a lot of confusion, a sense of what just happened. But path B is, well, it's far more systematic. And you could argue it's more terrifying because it is a choice, even if the person feels forced into it. This is killing under group influence, the herd mentality.
Right. This is where we see someone with no violent history at all join a group, a mob, a gang, a military unit, and suddenly they're participating in collective violence.
And this path relies on two very powerful psychological forces that are deeply connected. The first one is called the diffusion of responsibility.
Meaning the responsibility gets spread out.
Exactly. The sources point out that when an individual acts alone, they have to bear the full, crushing weight of their moral choices and any guilt that follows. But when you join a group, you experience this immediate psychological relief. You feel like you're not the one responsible, or at least not the only one.
Because the blame is shared.
The guilt is diffused. It's distributed among everyone in the group, which makes the action feel psychologically lighter for every single person involved. It makes horrific behavior scalable.
And that leads into the second mechanism, which is, what, even more profound.
It is. It's a term called de-individuation. This is the
Mhm.
critical concept. It's the temporary loss of your individual identity, your self-awareness, your personal accountability that happens when you're immersed in a large group.
You sort of melt into the crowd.
You do. Under de-individuation, you shed your personal inhibitions. You stop seeing yourself as a unique person with a name and a family and a history of beliefs. You start acting as an anonymous, interchangeable part of the herd.
That connects right back to the Stanford experiment. The guards, in their identical uniforms, with their identical roles, they were interchangeable parts of a machine.
Absolutely. But de-individuation is all around us. Think about mob violence, wearing a mask, or just being one face in a crowd of thousands. It gives you psychological cover. Or think about extreme online trolling. Anonymity allows people to say things they would never, ever say to someone's face.
The screen is the mask. The online community is the agent that diffuses the responsibility.
Yes. The individual's behavior stops being governed by their personal moral code and starts being governed by the norms of the group. And when the group's norm becomes violent or extreme, the de-individuated person conforms, often with more enthusiasm than they would have alone, because they're operating under that safety net of anonymity and shared guilt.
It gives them the psychological permission, the strength, to do something they felt too weak or too moral to do on their own. The thinking shifts completely from, I am choosing this, to we are doing this.
And if it's wrong, the collective is to blame, not me. And that's why the research is so clear and so insistent on this point. What causes someone to cross that ultimate line is so often not some inherent evil, but the perfect storm of circumstance. The environment provides the justification, the diffusion of guilt, and the collective identity you need to just overwhelm your own internal voice.
So after all this, what does it mean for us? We've walked through the Stanford Prison experiment, we've broken down those 4 triggers of power and dehumanization, and we've explored the 2 paths of survival and conformity. The main takeaway just seems so clear.
It is.
The journey to a horrific act is less about a failure of individual character and more about a failure of the surrounding structure. It's the circumstance, the shift in environment, the pressure, the loss of your own identity that drives the change.
And that realization it's incredibly sobering. The source material really drives home that this clinical understanding is far more frightening than any story about a monster, because it means the real horror is just latent potential within all of us.
A potential that's waiting.
It's waiting for the right or maybe the profoundly wrong set of circumstances to be activated. We are all, every one of us, susceptible to these forces of diffusion and de-individuation.
And that leaves us with the final provocative thought, the one that connects all of this back to our lives right now. If environmental pressure is the biggest factor, then we can't just rely on individual goodness to protect society. We have to look at the systems we build.
We have to.
So the question for you to think about is this. What unseen pressures or unchecked authorities might be subtly shifting your behavior in ways you don't even see? And what robust systemic checks, what oversight, what accountability, what protections against that us versus them thinking must we demand at our institutions to guard against the quiet, easy onset of de-individuation? Because it's not about finding the bad people. It's about making the environment safe for the good ones.